Sorry. Thank you for joining us here in Studio 3. My name is Anders Lundgren and I'm one of the organizers of this festival. And with me on stage I have these esteemed artists, Peter Snejbjerg from Denmark. Warm hand for him, please. Let's go. And also Tonci Zonjic from Croatia. Yes, and I've been working on that since Tonci's tagline is "You'll never pronounce his name correctly," so I've had a language coach work with me for a bit. Your mic, sir. Yes. And Peter and Zonjic, to just do a little brief introduction. They worked on titles like Peter, you worked on The Lords of Misrule for Dark Horse and Hellblazer, Books of Magic, Animal Man and various other stuff for DC Comics, Vertigo.
That is correct.
Yes, and Mr. Tonci Zonjic is known for stuff like the Immortal Iron Fist. At least I always talk about the Immortal Iron Fist since I love that stuff. Even though it was a brief, 30 pages or something like that. 34, yeah. And also some Daredevil, Marvel Heralds, some JLA, but most of all for the last year or so you've been drawing Lobster Johnson and Nathan Edmondson's spy-fi thriller, Who is Jake Ellis and Where's Jake Ellis? Yeah, so guys, thank you very much for being here, gracing our festival with your presence. And where do you want to start? Like past, present, or future? Present.
No time like the present.
No time like the present. Yeah, guys. So what are you working on right now then?
Oh, sorry.
I'm drawing the sequel to Where's Jake Ellis, which is a book, Where's Jake Ellis, and I'm finishing that. And I'm drawing the next Lobster Johnson book, which is called Get the Lobster.
Okay, so Where's Jake Ellis and Get the Lobster?
Yeah. Two books at the same time. Which is
okay. It's not a good idea. Why?
It's not a good idea because you need to switch from one project to the other, and these are pretty different things. Because Jake Ellis is something that's set in the present. It depends on color. It's very flashy in a way. That works great for a spy thriller. But Lobster Johnson is set in the 1930s, so it's very spare. It's very spare and it's very stark. So switching from one to the other can be tricky at times.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to that later on. And you, Peter, what are you working on right now?
Well, right now I just finished the last 3 albums that I've been doing for Le Bar in Belgium, which is a 3-album series.
Is that the World War X?
World War X, which I have just wrapped up, so now I'm just kicking back and doing a couple of children's books while I'm waiting for some other projects, which may or may not come along. The only thing right now confirmed is I'll be doing some more BPRD stuff later this year, but we haven't completely settled on the story.
Okay. Sounds great.
Yeah. It's good. I need a break and some time to think. I have some projects I want to see if I can start up, but we're at the very beginning of it still.
Okay. Yeah, so speaking of kicking back and what have you, how's your work ethic?
I don't think you can do comics unless you have a very good work ethic.
Like I talked to Ola Skogeng, a Swedish cartoonist, and he puts in 10 hours a day, basically all the time. So he switched from paper to digital recently, and then he just took like 2 weeks, 10 hours a day to learn how to work that thing.
Well, I switched to digital as well myself about 2 years ago now. which is actually time saving, but as we live in hard times, you also need that extra time sometimes. But it's hard work. I mean, if I think, I don't know if any of you were here earlier. There was that said this. I think it was actually that was Peter Madsen, the other Danish artist here, and he said that it's absolutely a lot of work to do comics, and you have to work, you know, the hours that you can. But it's also, you also have to be realistic about it. If you can only if you burn yourself out after a couple of weeks, there's no point. Then you have to slow down a bit. So I try to keep a normal 8-9 hour workday, depending on my on what I'm working on. It's very different. There's seldom a day when I'm not at the studio, but then I try to keep the weekends off. It's a hard work, but it's not. If you're doing it for 25 years, you can't kill yourself every week. You have to be realistic about it.
Yeah, and some people say that you need to put in at least 10,000 hours to be a good artist. And I talked to Tonci about this, and you've already put in 20,000 before.
I mean, most people who draw all the time, and they started in school. So if you count all those hours, it's easily about 10,000 Peters.
Yeah, I think that's. I've heard that too. I think we were sitting at the studio once trying to figure out 10,000 hours. How long time is that actually?
Yeah.
Because there were some people who said that 7 years. You need to work for 7 years.
7 years.
Well, if you work really hard, it's less than 7 years. But if you take time off doing other things, then it's probably like 7 years, 5-7 years. Yeah. From the time I started, when I finished art school, and until I was doing things that I would today myself consider, you know, sort of okay, as far as it ever got to be okay. I would say, yeah, that was probably 5 years or something like that. It takes a lot of time. It doesn't mean that you're a bad artist before that, but you just need a lot of experience, especially in comics.
In comics, it's all learning in public, basically.
That's the other thing. You get to see all your old mistakes again and again and again.
Yeah, I talked to Tonci a lot about that. How you know, are you, Tonci, the type of guy to constantly slam your work and no, I should have done better, or do you sometimes like give yourself a pat on the back and say, I mean, this page turned out really well, or this cover, what have you?
That I spoke for about 10 minutes.
Okay, and then you start to see the mistakes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and why do you think that is?
It's part of the culture, and in comics. I mean, Peter just said first 5 years. Everything we see here is done in my first 5 years. I just turned 5 in comics, basically. So it's all early work.
5-year mission, so to speak, so far.
So, it's hard to look back because you're always on the next thing. I mean, when you're working on a comic book, you never think back. The back stuff is always, it's just a collection of mistakes. Even the stuff you're working on now, you can already see mistakes. And the next thing is still unspoiled, it can still be good.
Okay, so you never go back and read your own stuff and you know, like admire the. I mean, you don't do your own coloring, for instance. It's one of the masters, Dave Stewart.
I do.
On Jake Ellis,
Yeah, all the Jake Ellis stuff is me, and Lobster Johnson is Dave Stewart.
Yeah.
But I can read my own stuff if it's more than 3 years old.
Okay, so there's like it has to incubate for 3 years, and then you can accept that you've moved on.
Yeah, so but that's like reading someone else's work. By that point, it's a different person.
Okay, so yeah, that's hardcore.
No, I think that's actually pretty. Yeah, I think that's pretty. A lot of, if you talk to a lot of artists, they'll tell you the same thing. Maybe the timing of it may be a little different. Maybe
some would say 10 years.
And some may like their own work for 15 minutes, maybe after they've done it, or.
The lucky ones.
Yeah, because we talked some last night about some of the extreme guys like Chris Ware, for instance, who's universally heralded as the greatest thing to happen to art since Michelangelo. But not if you ask him.
Well, it's hard to draw comics on that kind of burden on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And also he knows what he can get to do. So to say to him, this is the best thing, he knows it's not the best thing, and he feels apologetic about it. But no, I still see I can fix this and this and this, and then.
And even if he did believe that it was the best thing, then he would be very depressed, because then he would never be able to do anything that was better, and that would be even worse. So you just can't win. Yeah. You feel bad all the time.
And you, Peter, how do you feel about your stuff?
I think it's actually very much the same. There's usually a period when when you're working, you're usually a lot of time you're frustrated, but there's also sort of a high you get from drawing, which lasts a little bit after you have done it. You're sort of happy, and you often, of course, you're elated that you're finished at all, and then you're happy that you've done it, but then after a while you start seeing all the stuff that's a mistake, and then when it comes out, it can be really hard, because then you have the time to sit down and find all the mistakes and stuff, and as Tonci said, after a few years, you sort of dissociate yourself from it, and you can sort of see, oh, that wasn't necessarily bad, all that bad. I mean, he wasn't that good, but he wasn't that bad either.
Still apologetic.
The only thing I can say is I'm just happy it's not my first 5 years up there.
Okay. Yeah, well, I just thought of this Samuel Beckett quote that is quite appropriate for this. Yeah, the ink hasn't dried before it starts to disgust me. my words.
Yeah. There's the fail again, fail better quote.
Yeah.
It's very popular with the comics guys.
Yeah, well, so you've both worked with, or sort of worked from scripts at least, by Mike Mignola, who is also one of the guys known for slamming his own stuff in public. But how was that experience?
Well, I haven't worked directly with Mignola. The scripts I get are from John Arcudi, but of course I assume
they're executive produced by Mike.
They're based on their getting together and getting the story ideas worked out, of course. But it's very. I've worked with John for a long time now, and he's a clever writer. It's always good writers are always the hardest to illustrate, because then you have to really match what they're doing, and you have to be very aware of subtext and hidden layers and meanings. And John is one of these writers. He doesn't like to explain himself too much. You sort of have to figure out some of the things yourself, and then so sometimes it's a little hard if you look at it later and you realize that shit, I missed something here. There was an extra layer here that I just didn't catch when we were doing it, and I could have strengthened it if I knew it was there. Some hidden agenda in the story. But then again, it's also hard, but it's the challenge. That's what you. If you have ambition, you have to take these challenges and work with these guys who are the best. But obviously, it can be intimidating as well.
Yeah, how about you, Tonci?
My experience is pretty much the same.
Okay.
Except I probably miss more the subtext, because you're from Denmark, so we're not native English speakers here, which adds another layer of problems in getting the subtext.
Yeah, but is there like an artist's Bible or something that you get to butt heads against for? Because all of the Arcudi, Mignola, BPRD and related titles have a very interwoven mythology by this point. So do you get like, oh no, that thing can't look like X because no, they let you run wild with that stuff.
I was expecting a lot of it, because it seems like a book that was very heavily directed by these people. It's their baby. You expect them to micromanage, actually, but they're pretty hands off. From my experience, they just get the page to say, "Wow."
I don't think they've micromanaged, but I have had some things with it, because the designs, they're very obviously they want to keep some consistencies in the designs and stuff like that, and that takes a while, because when you come from doing superhero comics, for instance, there's some things that are important there, and you know, they're sort of the important things, that you get the Superman logo right and all these things, but the things that are not necessarily particularly interesting from an artistic point of view, but which means something to Marvel and DC for trademark reasons or whatever, continuity reasons. But with the Hellboy Only universe, you more get the feeling that it's more important that it's consistent, but it's not consistency for the sake of silly consistency. It's consistent because there's some ideas behind some of the stuff that needs to be. Nolan's obviously a very gifted designer, and there's some ideas behind the designs that he has made, and the designs that Guy Davies has made, and you just sort of, it took me a while to sort of catch on what the style sort of was. But once that happened, there's very little interference or problems at all.
Okay, yeah, this leads us into another question that since I've been working with this festival now for more than 10 years, and one of the supposed arguments that I've heard time and again is this sort of Blur versus Oasis fight between, mainstream. Bear with me here. That was just a little music reference I threw in for fun. Mainstream comics versus arty comics, and heartfelt stuff versus crass commercialism, and so on and so forth. And there's a question somewhere inside. But yeah, what's your stand on that? Creator-owned stuff versus the things you do for the big two or whatever. Tonci, let's just hit the ball out of the park with this one.
Well, I haven't worked for the big two in 5 years now, almost. Because maybe the 2010, maybe. And it was all short stories. The last thing I did was, I think, the Catherine Eminem story. And it was a silly Superman story, which was fun because it was slapstick with Superman. So it isn't really mainstream again. And on the indie stuff, there was never a conscious decision to do it differently, really. Because either in Vignoloverse, they never talk about it really. They don't treat them as superheroes, and it's never even mentioned. And on the image stuff, we get free reign. We can do whatever we want. So it's never an oppositional thing. It's not we're doing this because we're not superheroes. We just avoid the entire thing and just do.
Just focus on telling good stories.
Yeah, and a good story will always be a good story, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but basically what he said. we get really boring. We have to find something we disagree.
Okay.
I don't think. I think it's more a question of well, not to be crass, but there's an economic thing to it. If you work for DC or Marvel, there's a certain you don't. There's a certain reliability as opposed to some other publishers. Whereas if you're publishing yourself, you get more rights, but you also have greater risks. So it's sort of you sort of weigh it up and down. But I think there's very few people working in comics today that sort of try to tailor what they do depending on who they're working for. I think most people do what they do, and then the publishers publish who they think fit in with what they do. I don't think it's not like in the 30 years ago when people were expected to meet a house style or something. I think that sort of top-down management, at least on the art side, doesn't really exist anymore. But I suppose it does if you go out and you're drawing square pants, or whatever his name is, comics and stuff like that, then you obviously have these very, I know people who work on Disney comics, then you have these very specific guides, but in what we would, in the sort of thing we would work in, I don't think it exists anymore.
Okay, so if we take it in a slightly downward turn for a short bit, we can just be fast here, but has the recession hit comics, in your opinion? Has rates gone down? It's harder to get work as an artist these days, or Tonci?
I didn't notice any difference really in comics. I started working on Lobster in 2010, and the recession was done by then, basically. And I started in the middle of the recession. I couldn't say it really affected, at least me. I don't know about you.
I think in terms of the great big recession going out in the society in general, I think we're so far out on a limb of the branch of the economic tree that I think we're sort of, I don't think we really feel it that much, but of course there's some other, comics has its own crises and things with the digital thing and the competition from all the free stuff that kids can just get off the air, and so I don't think the housing bubble hit us particularly hard. No.
Okay, that's good.
Unless you had a house, unless you were an artist with a house you wanted to sell.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but that's good. Speaking of economies and stuff, do you buy a lot of comics yourself these days? Or do you get, of course, a lot of free goodies since you're working for big companies? But I hope you get free goodies. But what's the best book currently on the stands now, Tonci, do you think? That you don't draw yourself?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, it's meant to be.
Can I say BPRD collectively? Is that one book?
Yeah,
because that's
half a dodge, Tonci, but I'll let you off the hook.
But that's the one book where you can buy any issue and it will be good, whoever draws it, because you have the Fabio Mongabriel stuff coming out, you have James Herron, you have, I mean, everybody's good.
And the writing is
consistently good.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say, I mean, I'm sure there's some forgotten genius that we're not thinking of now working. I mean,
there's obvious stuff like Fatal.
Yeah, and obviously I buy a lot of when I go to comic fairs and things like that. I usually buy a lot of independent comics. I mean, the last one I read was some French. The last things I picked up were French, and I don't even know what they were about. But these are not. But it's difficult to say this is the greatest coming out now, because these are usually one-shot things. So it's not. But if you want that sort of monthly comic book or
I mean generally what you like that's coming out today. So we don't have to do a month.
I prefer actually these days to pick up a lot of the independent stuff, the non-genre stuff, the weird arty stuff. That I really there's just tons of good stuff coming out like that now.
Okay, so then we can almost switch to companies then, or publishers. Do you have any preference there?
No.
And Tonci, no?
No.
You guys are tough nuts to crack, but I'm up to the task. So yeah, but we were touched upon this briefly before. You switched to digital, Peter, you said, and how about you, Tonci?
I switched from digital.
From digital back to paper?
Basically, when I started drawing at all, I was
vinyl, isn't that?
Yeah, because
controversy. Now we can disagree about something.
Yeah. What's the pro and con then? Digital versus paper?
That's a tough one. I mean, coloring, I always did digitally. I never thought about coloring it physically with paint. It's just impossible to do nowadays, especially in a monthly comic book.
And maybe you have a cat?
Okay.
No, a lot of comics artists that I know, they have this cat problem where if they're inking something and then the cat comes along, and you know how cats are, they always have to be in the center of attention.
You learn when the cat comes and sticks the claws in your foot while you're drawing.
Okay.
You just ignore it.
Okay.
You learn that pretty soon, because the first bottle of ink that gets spilled, you just ignore the pain.
Ignore the pain. Okay. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I started digitally, completely painting digitally, and when I started drawing comics, thinking about drawing comics, I didn't even consider drawing them digitally, because it was the early days. You didn't have Manga Studio, you didn't have even Photoshop was not good to draw comics in. So it was pens, brushes, and now when the switch happened to digital again, I tried it, but I think I'll stick with pens for the time being.
Okay. So what is your process now? I'm curious. What is your work process now?
Thinking for weeks, then a lot of thumbnails, then I used to use blue pencils because I thought you had to use them. Then I realized I don't need them, and I'm just using an HB pencil to pencil it, and then simple technical pens to ink it, and then I do it again usually because I mess it up.
Because I went through a phase when I started doing the pencils in the computer, but then I would just simply print it in glue line and then ink it, because there's so many things, and when you're working on layouts,
they're great for
layouts.
Yeah. But I did the recent issue of Lobster Johnson. All the layouts I didn't do digitally, and I spent more time fixing the small mistakes in pencils than I saved doing it digitally. So I think I'll.
You pencil very tightly when you pencil? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I pencil tightly and then I loose inking.
Yeah.
I prefer that to the other approach, loose pencils.
Yeah. There might be a difference between us, because I've always penciled extremely loose to the point where it's ridiculous.
So the inking takes a long time?
So inking takes a long time. So for me it was sort of, what I liked about the process of going completely digital is that there isn't that distinction between the pencils and the inks. I just work on the drawing until I feel that it's finished and then it's done. So I guess that's what makes it work for me. But I could see if you want to be very...
whatever works, really.
Yeah.
Because I like the simplicity of the pen. Because one thing with digital is you can zoom in, and that would kill me. Because I used to ink with a brush, and I would be like... Yeah. And then you just focus on the lines, and you forget the design of the basic compositions. And I had to stop. I had to take a big fat pen and just draw like this, and focus on the storytelling.
Yeah. Also, there's something. I actually, when you're spending 9 hours a day by a drawing board, then the physical process is actually easier when you're sitting at the Cintiq, because if you tend to do that, sit with your eyes 5 centimeters away from you. I used to do that, and then it's a lot easier to be able to lean back and work big like that. But I guess it depends on what you're comfortable with.
It's fun to change up the process, because it can unlock a new kind of fun, because you can change things.
But you never get ink on your pants when you're working digital.
I get ink on my face usually.
How does that come about? Is it just splash, or
just when you get too close?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, really too close, basically.
Ouch. There's a close call. Well,
but I actually have still, when a few years actually before things went digital, I thought that the pen nibs that I used were right. I started thinking ahead, and I was thinking the pen nibs that I used will probably go out of production for some time, because people were using pens less and less. So I went out and bought, and I think I still have 1,500 pen nibs in a box. So I may have to take and do some stuff that's not digital in the future, because otherwise you have to borrow them with me. That's going to be
one thing about digital also. You use a Cintiq. I have a graphite too that I bought 15 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. No, you can't. No, you need the Cintiq.
Yeah, but I've heard a lot about this, like how people started hoarding paper supplies when the digital age started to creep in on us, and Zipatone and what have you started becoming a very precious commodity that you had to import, especially from Japan, or buy on eBay. And you have your pen nibs.
At least the pen nibs they're not what do you call it? They can't burn, so I'm not going to burn down my studio by an accidental fire in the 2 tons of paper I have in the basement.
No, that's good. Well, so I said we were going to talk about the past, present and future, so just to take the time machine back a bit, what kind of stuff did you read when growing up? Just a little favorite title, maybe something like that. Artist that inspired you.
Should I start? I'm oldest, then we'll be in chronological order. I read Tintin when I was a kid. I didn't really get into comics until I was in the Danish gymnasium, which would be, what would you be, 14, 15, 16 years old, 15, 16 years old. So I didn't read a lot of comics. I read humorous comics when I was a kid. And I was into drawing, but I was not into art for art's sake. I was just into drawing funny pictures. But then in the mid-80s, the beginning of the 80s, they started in Danish. A lot of stuff would be coming out. All the French albums that had been made would start coming out in Danish, and you would have a lot of American comics suddenly getting translated. And that was what opened my stuff to that, the heavy metal, all that sort of stuff. That's basically what
it was a good era. And you, Tonci?
I inherited a closet full of comics from Italy, which was stuff like Dylan Dog, Martin Mister, and Ken Parker. So I read hundreds of those since I was 3 years old, and I didn't think of drawing comics until I was maybe 18. And by then I've seen Edwin Bilkovich's stuff. He did Human Target and Grand of Tales, and it was like, they make comics like this in Croatia, so maybe I can do it.
I was thinking, there's a strong family resemblance in your stuff. I mean, not to complain, because he was an extremely talented artist.
It was a really big influence on me.
Yeah.
In all respects, for 6 or 7 years, it was just a primary influence. So
it's actually a style that's your kind of stuff is actually the kind of stuff I would draw if I was good enough. No, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I really admire that sort of you but there's so few people working in that style actually, and at least in American comics, that sort of that mixture of the realistic style, but the very simple design, that very. It's so cool. I really wish I could do it. I mean, I'm serious. I would if I could, but I can't. So I have to come up with something else.
Well, Eddie was very much into movies, and I think he was trying to make movies on paper, which is the worst thing you can say when you're in comics, because they get compared to movies and everybody's constantly banging on about it. But he was trying to make movies on paper, and what he did was he did make movies on paper, but if you try to adapt those into a movie, it wouldn't work. You get the same feeling, and I think a lot of people get that from my point of view.
Yeah, but I mean, comics are, in my opinion, almost always better than movies, because I mean that's when you read a comic, you always add something yourself. I mean, whereas for a film, you're more, for good or bad, force-fed with all the images. Whereas, I mean, most of the extremely cool stuff, not to slam your excellent work, but I mean, it happens in your head between the panels a lot of the time when you read a comic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, most of the work in a comic book is between the panels, and not drawing actually, but thinking out how the panels connect. It's much more, it's 95% of the work actually. I think drawing is really a small portion of it. And I purposefully tried to keep the drawing simple, just not to get in the way of the storytelling. So.
Did you? Now, when I say there's very few artists that I think work in that sort of in your sort of your part of the ballpark, but I think you have some strong. There's a strong tradition going back in some of the like Alex Toth, Nathan Caniff, Hugo Pratt. Do you say Hugo or Hugo or what
in Swedish? I mean, here Hugo
Pratt.
Do you
see that yourself as sort of a lineage, or is that you should just see that as you guys working from different angles and sort of getting at the same?
Using the same toolkit, basically.
Well, yeah.
People nowadays don't want to use that tools because it's old-fashioned, but those tools never stop working. Basically, it all works. I mean, Milton Caniff did daily comics for 60 years. You have to learn something from it.
Yeah.
And he had to boil it down. He couldn't. There was no room for tricks, basically.
I mean, he was one of those guys where this is probably not a quote, but I can imagine that he lived like this, that if I put the pen down, I'm half a week behind.
Yeah.
Horror.
Yeah, but looking into the future then, since time is running a bit short, if let's say a dream scenario where you get a luxurious grant and you can do whatever you like for a year or two, what would be like the project that you would that you've had on the back burner and took up again?
I think every artist has a big graphic novel planned somewhere in their heads that they try to get to someday. So maybe.
You don't want to spoil it, or
no?
No.
Until it's not only written but drawn and printed, I will not mention it because you'll hear so many stories about it.
I was going to
if I only had the time, I'd do just this.
Yeah, you can jinx it a lot, I guess.
It's not so much you jinxed it, it's more that you hear these stories all the time, people talking about when we get to, I have talked about this, I've done this myself so many times. When I get to this point, I'm going to blah, 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 and you just get a little bored hearing what people tell those stories.
Just do it instead.
Yeah. But obviously we all, as you say, we all have projects.
I think everybody has.
I don't think, actually I'm not sure a grant would be nice, of course, but it's not always the easiest. Well, I was talking to Kim Andersen, who's a Swedish artist who got a
Love Hurts,
and he got a grant, and he was talking about his. It's actually kind of hard because the thing is when you're working for a publisher who's paying you, you have the carrot in front of you, but if you get a grant, you have the carrot behind of you. That's kind of
it's a luxury little golden cage for Kim. Yeah, he got a nice grant.
I'm sure he's going to do well because he's a disciplined guy. But it's I have received an art grant in the past myself, and I thought it was actually kind of difficult. It made for a difficult situation. I would much rather work with a publisher or some other way where the money is coming when you have finished the stuff than having the money behind you. I think that would be we need that sort of gun to our heads.
I know that myself. I mean, if I don't have a deadline, then it's always very, very easy to do something else.
But also, because you're never happy with your stuff, if you have been given the money and told, the worst thing you can do to an artist is to sort of tell them that here's the money, I don't expect anything, just make it the best ever. Because then you can really kill them with that.
That's crippling. Well, guys, it's been great talking to you. So do you have any finishing comments or words of advice to young people or something like that before we field some questions from the audience?
Kids, finish your deadlines.
I don't think I should be giving any advice to anybody. You probably don't need advice, basically. That's what I learned. You just need to work.
What the man said.
Okay, so let's see if we have somebody who wants to speak up in the audience. No questions? Yeah?
Was it always a given that you were going to become comic creators, or were you changing between different professions?
Okay, the question was, did these guys always think of themselves as aspiring comics artists?
Yeah.
Before I started drawing comics, I never thought about drawing comics, basically. I fell into it. I had no plan. I was drawing book covers, storyboards, and a guy who moved to Croatia, he's a colorist, Matt Hollingsworth, he said, these guys need someone to fill in 8 pages. Could you do it? And I said, sure. And that's how I started drawing comics.
The rest is history.
Not yet.
I'm sort of
in the making.
I'm sort of the opposite. I drew comics always, I think, also as a child, but I never thought that it was something you could do for a living. I only thought of art school as a way of hiding from getting a real job. So it wasn't.
Well, there is some truth to that, I guess.
Except that I found out many years later that I'd chosen a life for myself that was much harder than any job I could have chosen. So.
Yeah, well, that's, true words were never spoken, I guess. But yeah, any more questions? Yeah, no? Let's go. Okay, well, I know that Tonci talked to me about this yesterday, but you don't have a favorite Marvel character that they ask you sometimes about, do you want to draw X, or, but do you have any other character in world literature or whatever that you would like to tackle? Yeah, I'm all about the big questions today, you know.
That's a really hard one. I don't think. I would say that I don't think I don't.
We don't think in terms of characters, basically.
No, I think I would like to. If there was something I would like to say, I would say something like, I would like to create something that was like this and this and this. You know, I would like to create the Moby Dick of comics or something. But I wouldn't want to do Moby Dick as a comic.
Yeah. Finally, the book told from the whale's perspective.
John would write it. He likes it. He loves it.
Yeah. Although it's a great book, it's hard to get through, but it's worth it.
Okay, well, yeah, you guys are like two peas in a pod almost, so I hope to see a collaboration between the two of you sometime in the future. Yeah?
Well.
Okay, well, thank you, Tonci, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Anders.
And a big hand for you. And thank you, dear audience, for listening to us.
Thank you.